Captain Elena Vasquez gripped the armrests of her command chair, the hum of the Odysseus engines vibrating through the deck like a distant heartbeat. The bridge was a cocoon of soft blue lights and holographic displays, casting long shadows across the faces of her crew. She glanced at her first officer, Marcus Hale, whose steady gaze met hers from the navigation console. Marcus was the cautious one, always double-checking trajectories before a jump, his fingers now hovering over the controls with deliberate precision. Beside him sat Dr. Lila Chin, the engineer, her wiry frame hunched over a flickering panel, tools clinking in her belt like forgotten promises. Lila's wit cut through tension like a laser, sharp, unexpected, but right now her brow furrowed in focus. The view screen dominated the forward wall, framing the void ahead, a nebulous swirling arms of gas and dust, painted in ethereal purples and golds. They were charting a new route through the Veil sector, bypassing the war-torn core worlds where alien alliances frayed like old wiring. Elena's mission was simple on paper: scout for habitable outposts, secure resources for the colonies back home. But out here, simplicity was a lie. Humanity's expansion had always been a grind, one clever fix at a time, against the universe's indifference. "Jump in 3, Marcus said, his voice even, though Elena caught the slight tightening of his jaw. He was brave in the quiet way, the kind that held the line when others faltered. The Odyssey was a retrofitted hauler, no sleek warship, just human grit welded into hull plating. They'd pushed her hard already, skirting asteroid fields and dodging pirate signals. Lila snorted, not looking up. If this old girl doesn't rattle her bolts loose first. Capacitors are whining like a kid on ration night. Her hands danced across the board, rerouting power with the ease of someone who jury-rigged half the ship's life support on a dare. Elena nodded, her own pulse steady despite the knot in her gut. Steady as she goes. We've come too far to flinch now. The countdown ticked down, and the stars stretched into lines as the engines thrummed louder. The nebula loomed closer, its beauty hiding the radiation storms that could fry their shields in seconds. This was exploration at its rawest. No fanfare, just the weight of what they carried. Data, hope, and the unyielding drive that had carried humans from a single blue marble to the galaxy's edge. The ship lurched into the jump, reality folding around them. For a heartbeat, everything held, then alarms blared, red lights pulsing like wounds. Lila cursed under her breath. Gravitic shear. It's pulling us off course, shields at 60%. Elena's hands flew to the comms. Compensate, Marcus. Lila, buy us time. The nebula's heart wasn't empty, it cradled something ancient, a gravitational anomaly twisting space like a predator's claw. Their plan to skim the edge had backfired. The shear was stronger than scans predicted, dragging the Odyssey toward a collapsing star cluster at its core. Escape velocity was slipping away, and with it, their way home. Captain Elena Voss gripped the armrest of her command chair, the hum of the Endurance's engines vibrating through the deck like a distant heartbeat. The view screen flickered with starlight, but the real storm brewed in the sensor readouts, red alerts pulsing across the console as the nebula's gravitational eddies tugged at the ship's hull. Her crew, a tight-knit trio including herself, had pushed into this uncharted fringe to map a potential wormhole route, but now the anomaly was fighting back, its plasma storms warping spacetime in unpredictable bursts. "Status, Jax," Elena said, her voice steady despite the sweat beading on her forehead. Jax, the wiry engineer with a perpetual grease smear on his cheek, hunched over his panel, fingers flying across holographic keys. "Shields at 60%, Cap. That last surge fried the auxiliary generators. We're venting plasma from the aft nacelles, nothing critical yet, but if we don't reroute power soon, we'll be drifting fuel for the stars." Mira, the navigator, leaned forward, her sharp eyes narrowing at the trajectory projections. Always the cautious one, she adjusted her glasses with a quick flick, buying time to think. "We can't punch through blind. The eddies are shifting faster than predicted. One wrong vector, and we're smeared across a light year." Elena nodded, her mind racing through options. The mission was simple on paper: chart the nebula for the Coalition, prove humanity's worth among the alien fleets who dismissed them as reckless upstarts. But out here, simplicity shattered like brittle hull plating. She remembered the briefings back on Terra, endless debates about risks versus rewards, but theory meant nothing when your ship groaned under invisible forces. Alright, plan B, Ilara decided, unstrapping her harness. Jax, isolate the core and boost the primaries to the main thrusters. Mira, plot a slingshot around that gas pocket. Use its gravity to whip us clear. I'll head to engineering. We need hands-on for this reroute. Jax shot her a grin, the kind that hid his nerves behind bravado. You got it? Just don't blow us up down there. As Ilara dashed through the corridors, emergency lights casting long shadows, she felt the ship shudder again. A deep, resonant groan that echoed her own resolve. The bulkheads creaked, and a loose panel rattled free, clattering against the grating. She kicked it aside, boots pounding the deck. In engineering, the air was thick with ozone, alarms blaring in staccato bursts. Jax's voice crackled over the intercom. Incoming surge, brace. The deck bucked, hurling Ilara against a conduit. Pain flared in her shoulder, but she pushed on, wrenching open the access panel. Sparks danced like fireflies, illuminating the tangle of conduits pulsing with raw energy. Her hands, calloused from years of jury rigging on frontier haulers, danced across the wires, bypassing safeties, splicing feeds with practiced precision. Human grit, they called it back home. No fancy AI overrides, just sweat and stubbornness. Myra's voice cut in, urgent but calm. Vector locked. Thrusters firing in 3, 2. The ship lurched forward, engines roaring to life as Ilara sealed the last connection. Alarms quieted to warnings, the view screen shifting as they arced away from the nebula's heart. But victory tasted bittersweet. Sensors pinged a new anomaly, a faint distress signal, human in origin, buried in the static. Not the clean escape they'd hoped for. Ilara wiped her brow, returning to the bridge with a limp she ignored. We're clear, but that signal, it's one of ours. Lost probe maybe? Or worse. Jax slumped back, exhaling. Comms array took a hit. Can't raise it clean. Mira traced the signal's origin, her caution giving way to determination. It's deep in the eddies, cap going after it means diving back in. Ilara stared at the stars, the nebula's glow a deceptive beauty veiling its fury. The mission had just gained weight, a brother's call in the void, demanding they choose between safety and the unyielding pull of duty. She straightened, resolve hardening. We don't leave our own behind. Plot the course. Captain Ilara Voss gripped the armrests of her command chair, the hum of the stellar Nomadus engines vibrating through the deck like a distant heartbeat. The view screen flickered with the swirling chaos of the nebula's edge, tendrils of ionized gas clawing at the hull sensors. Status on the core? She asked, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. Engineer Kai Ren hunched over his console, fingers dancing across holographic readouts. Sweat beaded on his forehead, catching the blue glow of the displays. Holding at 60% cap. But these fluctuations, it's like the nebula's breathing down our necks. One more surge and we'll lose containment. Beside him, Lyra, the avian navigator from the Coalition fleet, tilted her head, feathers ruffling in agitation. Her beak clicked softly, a habit when she was thinking hard. The gravitational eddies are shifting faster than my projections. We can't punch through blind, it'll shear us apart. Ilara nodded, eyes narrowing at the screen. The plan had been simple. Skirt the nebula's outer rim to reach the Coalition relay station, resupply, and report the distress signal they'd picked up from a derelict freighter. But the nebula had other ideas, its magnetic storms scrambling their NAV systems and draining power reserves. They were down to emergency rations and what fuel the inertial dampeners hadn't already siphoned. Options? Ilara said, standing to pace the cramped bridge. Her boots thudded softly against the grated floor, each step a reminder of the ship's age, human-built, pre-coalition war, patched together with grit and whatever spares they could scavenge. Kai leaned back, wiping his brow. We could vent plasma to create a shield bubble, buy us time to recalibrate. Risky though, might ignite the gas around us. Lyra's eyes widened, her talons tapping the console. Ignite? That would turn us into a beacon. The storms would converge. Or scatter, Kai countered, his voice laced with that stubborn human optimism. Like fireworks. We've got the mass drivers primed, I can angle them to push us clear. Elara stopped pacing, weighing it. The freighter's signal had been faint, automated, pleading for aid from what sounded like a mixed crew, humans and aliens trapped in the nebula's heart. Walking away wasn't an option. Not for her, not after the war had taught her the cost of isolation. But the Nomad wasn't a warship. She was a hauler, tough but no match for cosmic tantrums. Prep the vents, she decided. Lyra, plot a vector through the weakest eddy. Kai, if this backfires, you're buying the first round at the next station. A ghost of a smile crossed Kai's face as he punched in commands. Alarms blared softly in warning, the ship groaning as plasma hissed into the void. Outside, the nebula lit up, a brief, furious bloom of violet fire that pushed against the hull, rattling loose panels. For a moment it worked. The storm parted like curtains, revealing a narrow corridor of calmer space. Lyra whooped, a trill echoing from her throat. We're through. Relay in sight, then the feedback hit. The view screen shattered with static, and the core's hum pitched into a whine. Lights dimmed, console sparking. Kai cursed, slamming a fist on the override. Overload. It's pulling us back. Elara lunged for the manual controls, straps biting into her shoulders as the ship bucked. The nebula's grasp tightened, an invisible hand dragging them into deeper turmoil. The freighter's signal strengthened, now a desperate loop. Asterisk, help us. Coordinates locked. Don't abandon. Asterisk, she locked eyes with her crew. No speeches, just action. Hold on. We're not done yet. The view screen flickered with static, the nebula's swirling gases painting the bridge in bruised purples and indigos. Her crew, 3 souls she'd handpicked for their unyielding grit, hovered in tense silence around the central console. Jax, the wiry engineer with a perpetual grease smudge on his cheek, tapped furiously at a holographic display. Beside him, Lena, the sharp-eyed navigator whose caution had saved them from more than one stellar misstep, cross-checked coordinates with a furrowed brow. And there was Marco, the medic-turned-reluctant tactician, his steady hands now clenched into fists as he watched the anomaly grow. The external challenge had hit them like a rogue asteroid 2 cycles back. A rogue singularity, not on any charts, warping spacetime just enough to slingshot their ship off course. It wasn't a black hole's dramatic maw, but a subtle tear, pulling debris and energy into a vortex that could shred the Nomad's hull if they drifted closer. Resources were tight, fuel cells at 40%, oxygen recyclers straining from the detour, and the nearest relay station was weeks away. Elara's initial plan, a high-burn evasion maneuver, had backfired spectacularly. The singularity's gravity well had amplified their thrust, flinging them into this nebula where sensors went haywire and comms were a whisper. Jax, talk to me, Elara said, her voice cutting through the low beeps like a knife. She kept it even, but her knuckles whitened on the chair. He didn't look up, fingers dancing over the controls. The auxiliary thrusters are online, but the warp coil's destabilizing. That pull out there, it's not just gravity. It's folding the field lines. If we fire now, we might punch through, but it'll cost us the coil. No more jumps for months. Lena leaned in, her dark hair falling across her face as she traced a path on her tablet. We can't afford that. The nebula's hiding pockets of ionized gas. Fire wrong, and we ignite the whole damn cloud. Burn up like a match in the wind. Her words carried that cautious edge, the one that made her argue every risky call, but now it laced with urgency. She'd plotted 3 alternates already, each branching into dead ends. Marco paced behind them, his medic's satchel slung over one shoulder like an old habit. And if we don't move? Structural integrity drops another 5% per hour. We've got fractures in the outer plating from the slingshot. People start suffocating when the seals fail. He stopped, eyes locking on Elara's. We're not dying out here for a shortcut. Elara nodded, absorbing it all. The bridge air tasted metallic, recycled too many times, and the nebula's glow cast long shadows that danced like specters. She remembered the Academy Sims, clean, predictable crises, but this was raw, the kind of stakes that etched lines into faces. Humanity's reach into the stars wasn't about glory, it was this, the grind of adaptation when the universe didn't yield. All right, she said, rising slowly, her boots magnetized to the deck with a soft click. No blind thrust. Lena, refine that vector. Find us a weak spot in the gas pockets, something we can thread without sparking. Lena's eyes narrowed in focus, already recalibrating. Jax, prep the coil for a partial discharge. Not full warp, just enough to nudge us out. We'll jury-rig the spares if it fries. He grunted agreement, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. And Marco, Ilera continued, turning to him, get the med bay sealed. If this goes south, we prioritize containment over comfort. He met her gaze, a flicker of that camaraderie sparking, the unspoken bond of survivors who'd patched each other up in worse scrapes. As Jax initiated the coil sequence, a low whine built in the ship, vibrating up through Ilera's soles. The view screen sharpened for a moment, revealing the Singularity's hazy rim, a ring of distorted stars bending like molten glass. Tension coiled in her chest, but she pushed it down. Panic was the real hazard here. The crew moved as one, arguments dissolving into action. Lena calling out adjustments, Jax confirming power flows, Marco relaying seal statuses over the intercom. The Nomad shuddered as the partial discharge fired, a controlled pulse that lit the bridge in blue-white flash. Alarms blared briefly, then quieted. Ilera held her breath, watching the trajectory arc on the display. They inched away from the vortex, but the nebulous gases swirled closer, tendrils brushing the hull like curious fingers. A small victory, but the cost lingered. The coil's hum faltered, a promise of slower travels ahead, and the oxygen readouts dipped another notch. In the aftermath, as the ship stabilized, Jax slumped against the console, a wry smile cracking his fatigue. Humans and our fixes. Always one step from breaking everything. Lena shot him a look, half exasperated, half relieved, while Marco clapped her shoulder on his way to check the seals. Ilera allowed herself a steady exhale, the stars outside shifting subtly, as if the galaxy itself had noted their defiance. But the Singularity still loomed in the rear sensors, a reminder that escape was temporary. The real adaptation was just beginning. Elena gripped the railing of the observation deck, her knuckles white against the cold metal. The nebula swirled outside the viewport like a living bruise, purples and indigos bleeding into the void, with flashes of electric blue that made her eyes ache. Jax was below in the engine room, his voice crackling over the comms, laced with that irrepressible sarcasm that kept them all from cracking. Cap, if this jury rig works, I'll kiss the first alien we meet. If it doesn't, well, blame Mira for her pessimistic math. Mira shot a glare at the speaker, her fingers flying over the console as she cross-checked the readings. She was the cautious one, always double-backing, her dark hair tied back in a practical knot that mirrored her mindset. My math is fine, Jax. It's your shortcuts that are going to get us ionized. The ship groaned beneath them, a low vibration that rattled the deck plates, as if the Endeavor itself protested the strain. They'd been limping through the nebula for days now, ever since the anomaly had fried their primary shields. The external challenge was clear. The stellar winds here warped reality itself, pulling at the hull like invisible hands, threatening to tear them apart piece by piece. No rival fleets, no dramatic battles, just the relentless grind of survival against a cosmos that didn't care. Losing the ship meant drifting forever, frozen corpses in a tin can, or worse, being scattered across the stars. Elena's plan had seemed solid at first. Reroute power from non-essentials to boost the auxiliary generators, buy time to punch through to clearer space. But as Jax initiated the sequence, alarms blared. Red lights strobed across the deck, and Myra's console lit up with error codes. Power surge incoming. It's feedback, shut it down. Too late. The deck buckled under Elena's feet, a sharp jolt sending her sprawling. Sparks erupted from a nearby panel, the acrid smell of burning circuits filling the air. Jax's comms cut out mid-curse, replaced by static that hissed like laughter. Elena hauled herself up, tasting blood from a split lip, and slammed the emergency override. The surge died, but so did half their lights, plunging the deck into dim emergency glow. Mira was already moving, grabbing a toolkit from the wall mount. That backfired spectacularly. The reroute overloaded the core relays. We're down to minimal power, life support's holding, but propulsion's toast for the next hour at least. Her voice was steady, but Elena caught the tremor in her hands as she pried open the panel. Elena nodded, forcing calm into her tone. We adapt. Jax. No response. She keyed the comm again. Jax, report. That's an order. Silence, broken only by the distant hum of failing systems. The nebula pressed closer outside, tendrils of gas licking at the hull as if sensing weakness. Down in the engine room, Jax coughed through the smoke, waving away the haze with one hand while clutching a scorched arm with the other. The explosion had been contained, barely, but it had hurled tools across the compartment like shrapnel. He staggered to the comm panel, ignoring the burn that seared his skin. Alive, Cap, barely. Relays are slacked, gonna need to bypass manually. Mira, your math was spot on, my bad. Elena's voice came back, clipped and urgent. Can you fix it? Working on it. But we're bleeding atmosphere in the lower bays. Patch it or we all suffocate in style. He grinned through the pain, though no one could see it, and started splicing wires with deliberate care. One wrong move and the whole ship went dark. Up top, Elena paced, her mind racing through options. The initial plan's failure hung heavy, a reminder that ingenuity only went so far against the universe's indifference. Mira sealed the panel, her face smudged with soot. We can't keep throwing power at this. The nebula's winds are accelerating, another surge like that and we're done. Then we don't surge. We glide. Elena's eyes fixed on the viewport, where a narrow channel of calmer gas shimmered faintly amid the chaos. It was a gamble, threading the needle without engines, but staying put meant certain death. Mira plotted drift course. Manual thrusters only. Jax, buy us time on those relays. Aye, Cap. Jax's response crackled through, weaker now. Just don't make me walk back from this one. The ship shuddered as Mira engaged the minimal thrust, easing them toward the channel. Tension coiled in the air, thick as the nebula's fog. Elena watched the stars, those few visible, shift slowly as if the galaxy itself held its breath. One wrong drift and the winds would claim them, hull breached, dreams scattered. But they moved, inch by agonizing inch, humanity's stubborn grit pushing against the void. Mira glanced at Elena, a rare spark of determination in her eyes. This might work. Or it might not. Elena clapped her shoulder. That's why we try. The channel loomed, a fragile promise amid the storm, and the Endeavor slipped toward it, lights flickering like a heartbeat. Elena gripped the railing as the shuttle bucked against the nebula's swirling currents, the viewport alive with violet tendrils that clawed at the hull like living smoke. Jax was already at the console, his fingers dancing over the flickering controls, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill in the cabin. This isn't turbulence, he muttered, voice tight. It's pulling us apart at the seams. Structural integrity down to 70%. Mira huddled in the corner, her tablet clutched like a shield, eyes darting between readouts that painted a grim picture. The nebula's exotic particles weren't just interfering with sensors. They were rewriting the ship's code on a molecular level, turning alloy into something brittle and unpredictable. Their initial plan, skirt the edge and slingshot to the nearest relay, had backfired spectacularly when the engines seized mid-burn, stranding them in the heart of the storm. Now, every jolt risked a hull breach, and the oxygen recyclers were starting to falter, whispering promises of suffocation if they didn't adapt fast. Options? Elena asked, her voice steady even as her knuckles whitened on the rail. She wasn't one for panic. Years captaining fringe haulers had taught her that fear was just another variable to outmaneuver. Jax shot her a wry glance, the corner of his mouth twitching upward in that defiant way of his. We could vent the auxiliary tanks, create a plasma wake to disperse the particles. Risky, might fry the NAV systems, but it'd buy us a window. He paused, wiping his brow. Or we ride it out, hope the inertial dampeners hold. Your call, Cap. Mira shook her head, her caution surfacing like a reflex. Venting could accelerate the corrosion. These particles bond to energy signatures. We'd be painting a target on ourselves. She tapped her tablet, pulling up a holographic projection of the nebula's core, a throbbing mass of ionized gas that pulsed with an almost deliberate rhythm. Look at this. It's not random. There's a pattern like it's feeding. The shuttle shuddered again, harder this time, and a warning klaxon blared as a panel sparked overhead. Elena's mind raced, piecing together fragments. The old logs from the first survey ships that vanished here, tales of alien tech woven into the stars themselves. No time for myths. Jax, prep the vent sequence. Mira, monitor the particle density, find us a path through the thinnest veil. She straightened, meeting their eyes. We're not becoming another ghost story. Not today. As Jax initiated the purge, the cabin filled with the acrid tang of ionized air, and the viewport flared with the brilliant arc of escaping plasma. For a heartbeat, the violet tendrils recoiled, parting like curtains before a gale. The shuttle surged forward, engines groaning back to life in fits and starts. But Myra's voice cut through the roar, sharp with alarm. Captain, density spiking on the port side. It's adapting. Closing in faster. Elena nodded grimly, strapping into the pilot's chair as the stars beyond twisted into mocking smears. The ploy had worked, but only for a moment. The nebula was learning, its grasp tightening like a vice. Jax cursed under his breath, rerouting power from life support to shields, the air growing thinner with each passing second. They were through the worst of the outer layers, but the core loomed ahead, a maw of raw energy that demanded tribute. In the dim glow of the console, Elena's hands steadied on the controls, her resolve a quiet fire amid the chaos. The cost was mounting. Jax's quick fix had shaved hours off their reserves, and Myra's projections showed no clear exit without sacrifice. Yet as the shuttle plunged deeper, she felt the pull not just of the storm, but of the uncharted beyond, where humanity's reach had always defied the void. They would carve their way out, or etch their defiance into the stars themselves. The dim hum of the auxiliary generators filled the engineering bay, a constant reminder that the Endeavor was limping, not flying. Lena wiped sweat from her brow, her fingers leaving a streak of grease across her forehead. She glanced at Marcus, who was elbow-deep in the plasma conduit, his face set in that stubborn focus she knew too well. "This bypass isn't holding," he muttered, voice tight over the whine of failing seals. The surge from the asteroid field fried half the relays. "If we don't reroute power soon, we'll lose life support in the forward sections." Kara hovered nearby, her tablet clutched like a shield, eyes darting between readouts and the flickering holodisplay. She was the cautious one, always calculating odds, but now her usual precision cracked under the strain. Rerouting means pulling from the shields. The Krell ships are still out there, probing our perimeter. One hit and we're done. Her voice carried the weight of the crew's unspoken fear. The aliens had ambushed them 2 jumps ago, their bioships twisting through the void like living nightmares, forcing the Endeavor Aveir asterisk into this derelict corner of the nebula. Lena straightened, rolling her shoulders against the ache. She was the brave sort, the one who'd volunteered for the away team back on Epsilon, but bravery felt thin here, stretched across vacuum and failing tech. "We don't have a choice. Prioritize the engines. If we drift any longer, those probes will lock on." She grabbed a fusion welder from the toolkit, its handle warm from overuse, and knelt beside Marcus. Together, they pried open the access panel, sparks dancing like fireflies in the low gravity. The plan had been simple at first. Evade the Krell by slingshotting around the gas giant, using its magnetic storms for cover. But the asteroid belt had turned that into a gamble, pummeling the hull and shorting the NAV systems. Now, with the Krell's hunter packs closing in, every second counted. Marcus grunted as he spliced a cable, his hands steady despite the tremor in his arm from an earlier shock. "Remember that drill on Mars? The one where the hap cracked?" He shot Lena a wry look, trying to lighten the air. "Felt like this. All grit, no glory." She snorted, sealing a junction with a hiss of plasma. "Yeah, and we patched it with spit and prayers. Worked then, it'll work now." But doubt gnawed at her. The Krell weren't like the Sims. Their ships adapted, grew defenses mid-fight, organic hulls regenerating faster than human weapons could burn. Intel from the colony said they viewed humanity as a glitch, a slow-spreading infestation to be excised. A klaxon blared suddenly, red lights pulsing across the bay. Kara's tablet chimed urgently. "Incoming signature, Krell drone 3 minutes out. It's scanning for weak points." Her fingers flew over the controls, but her face paled. The early reroute they'd tried in the mess hall had backfired, drawing the drone straight to them instead of masking their trail. Marcus cursed under his breath, yanking the last connection into place. Power surged through the lines, lights flickering brighter for a heartbeat. Lena stood, grabbing the comms panel. "Bridge, this is engineering. Engines at 60%. Give us a burst vector, anything to shake this thing." Static crackled back, the captain's voice strained. "Copy. Holding pattern Delta. Make it count." The ship shuddered as thrusters fired, a low rumble building underfoot. Lena braced against the bulkhead, watching the hollow track, the drone closing like a predator's shadow. Kara muttered calculations, her caution giving way to quiet resolve. "If we vent the auxiliary tanks on the port side, it might create a debris illusion. Buy us time." Marcus nodded, already moving. "Do it." He slapped the override, and a muffled whoosh echoed through the vents, plasma exhaust blooming into space like a false explosion. The drone veered, sensors confused by the mimicry, but not for long. Alarms wailed again. It was adapting, tendrils extending from its hull. Lena's mind raced, piecing together scraps of colony lore. Humans had survived worse, outsmarting automated swarms on Titan with jury-rigged EMPs from mining gear. "The conduit," she said, voice sharp. "We overload it manually. Channel the surge into the outer hull, make us a lightning rod for their scan." It was risky, one misstep and the bay would flood with radiation. Kara hesitated, eyes wide. That could fry the whole deck. But Marcus was already wiring it, his grin fierce. Better than waiting to be boarded. Trust the human touch. The drone loomed closer on the display, a grotesque silhouette against the nebula's glow. Lena hit the initiator, and energy arced wildly, the ship jolting as if struck by a god's hammer. Sparks flew, console smoking, but the drone recoiled, its organic circuits overwhelmed in a cascade of false signals. It spiraled away, trailing ethereal vapor. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by their ragged breaths. The Endeavor pulled free, engines humming steadier now, slipping deeper into the nebula's embrace. But Lena felt the cost settle in, the conduit was slag beyond repair, and Marcus nursed a burn on his hand, wrapping it with a rag. Kara slumped against the wall, tablet dimmed. That was too close. If they send the pack. "We adapt," Lena said, meeting their eyes. The stars outside shifted subtly, as if the galaxy itself conceded ground. But the Krell weren't done. The hunt was just beginning. Elena gripped the console's edge, her knuckles whitening as the ship's alarms blared in staccato bursts. The void outside the viewport twisted with false colors, artifacts from the warp drive's desperate strain. Marcus hunched over the engineering panel, sweat beading on his forehead, his fingers flying across the holographic keys. "It's holding barely," he muttered, voice rough like gravel. "But if we push it any harder, the coral breach. We're talking vaporization, Cap. The whole damn crew." Jack swiveled in the pilot's chair, his usual smirk absent, eyes narrowed at the NAV display. A cluster of alien drones swarmed in their wake, their sleek forms cutting through the debris field like knives through silk. "They're gaining," he said flatly. 2 minutes tops before they lock on. We can't outrun them in this state." The plan had been simple at the start of the shift. Slip through the asteroid belt, use the rocks as cover to shake the pursuers. But the belt was denser than scans suggested, and one glancing hit had sheared off a stabilizer fin. Now the Endeavor limped, its hull groaning under the G-forces. Elena's mind raced, piecing together fragments of data. The aliens, those inscrutable Krell, weren't after salvage. They wanted the human ship's black box, the one holding schematics for the jump gate we jury-rigged from scrap. Lose it and the colony back on Epsilon 4 starved for tech. "Options," Elena demanded, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. She wasn't one for panic. Caution had kept them alive this long. But grit alone wouldn't cut it now. Marcus straightened, wiping his brow with a grease-streaked sleeve. "We vent the auxiliary tanks. By some thrust, but it'll leave us dry for Atmo re-entry later. Risky as hell." Jack shook his head. "Or we slingshot around that big rock, use its gravity to whip us clear. But one wrong vector and we're paced." Elena waited, the ship's hum vibrating through her boots. Venting meant stranding them light years from help, a slow death in the black. The slingshot? A gamble on Jax's piloting, and he was good but not infallible. The Krell drones pulsed closer, their energy signatures flaring on the sensors like hungry eyes. Do the slingshot, she decided. Marcus reinforced the struts. Jax plotted tight. Jax's hands danced over the controls, the ship banking sharply. Alarms wailed as they dove toward the asteroid, a hulking gray behemoth pocked with craters. Marcus cursed under his breath, rerouting power to the inertial dampeners. The viewport filled with the rock's craggy surface rushing up, close enough to see the dust swirling in its weak gravity. Hold on, Jax growled. The Endeavor skimmed the edge, engines roaring as they harnessed the pull. For a heartbeat, Elena felt the tug in her bones, the ship straining like a bowstring. Then they snapped free, velocity spiking. The drones faltered, two colliding in the asteroid's shadow with bursts of plasma. But the third adapted, its form shifting mid-flight, accelerating with a whine that echoed through the comms. It fired, a lance of coherent light that grazed the hull, melting a sensor array in a shower of sparks. Direct hit on the aft scanners, Marcus yelled. We're blind back there. Elena slammed the override, sealing the breach. Smoke curled from vents, acrid and choking. The colony's faces flashed in her mind, families counting on that gate tech. No speeches, no heroics, just the raw push to survive. Keep her steady, Jax. Marcus, give me everything you've got on that core. As the ship hurtled into the nebula's edge, colors bleeding across the stars, the Krell drone locked on once more. The chase wasn't over, it had only sharpened. Ilara gripped the console's edge, her knuckles whitening against the hum of the ship's failing engines. The void outside the viewport stretched infinite, but the real threat pulsed closer. The swarm's vanguard, those biomechanical horrors twisting through the debris field like living shadows. Jax's voice crackled over the intercom from engineering, laced with that stubborn optimism she both admired and cursed. We've got a patch on the warp coil, but it's holding by spit and prayer. If we don't vent the excess plasma soon, it'll cook us from the inside. She nodded, though he couldn't see it, her eyes flicking to the tactical display. The swarm had adapted again, their tendrils now mimicking the asteroid fragments to close the gap. No brute force this time, just patience, the kind that eroded empires. Understood. Prioritize stability. I'll buy us time up here. Her fingers danced across the controls, rerouting auxiliary power to the point defense lasers. A burst of fire lanced out, shearing through a cluster of drones, but for every one she felled, two more slithered into view. In the medbay, Dr. Lena Voss monitored the vital signs of the few survivors they'd picked up from the outpost. Refugees from the Orion Drift, their faces gaunt under the sterile lights. She adjusted the foredrip for a young engineer whose arm ended in a makeshift stump, the wound cauterized by swarm acid. They're stable, but the neural blockers won't last forever, she murmured into her comm. If we hit another skirmish, it'll be triage. Her hands, steady as always, betrayed the tremor in her voice. Lena had patched up colonists on a dozen worlds, but this was different. No soil to till, no dawn to wait for. Just the cold certainty of space claiming its due. Jax wiped sweat from his brow, the engineering bay a furnace of sparking conduits and flickering holograms. He jury-rigged the plasma vents using salvaged hull plating, a human trick born of too many frontier breakdowns. Ilara, on your mark. Venting in 3. He counted down, the ship shuddering as superheated gas erupted from the aft nozzles, a blazing tail that scorched the pursuing drones. For a moment, the swarm recoiled, their formation fracturing like brittle ice. But Jax knew it was temporary. These things learned, evolved in ways no Alliance fleet ever had. Ilara seized the opening, plotting an evasive vector through the densest asteroid clump. The Endeavor groaned as it accelerated, gravity compensators straining. Lena, strap in. We're threading the needle. Alarms wailed, proximity alerts painting the viewport in red strobes. An asteroid loomed, jagged and unforgiving, but she nudged the thrusters just so, years of piloting freighters through nebulae paying off in this desperate weave. The ship clipped a fragment, sparks flying, but they emerged on the far side, the swarm momentarily blinded by the debris wake. Down in medbay, the refugee stirred, his eyes fluttering open to the chaos. You're human, he rasped, gripping Lena's arm. Heard the broadcast. The ones saying your kind walked away from the core worlds, left the stars to fend for themselves. She met his gaze, her expression softening amid the red lights. We didn't walk away. We carried on. Now hold still, this'll sting. She injected a stabilizer, buying him minutes, maybe hours. Jax's laugh echoed through the calm, ragged but genuine. That bought us a click, maybe two. But the swarm's regrouping, look at the scans. Ilara pulled up the feed, her stomach twisting. The drones were reforming, tendrils linking into a net, adapting to the plasma burn by insulating their hulls with scavenged metal. The challenge wasn't just survival, it was outthinking an enemy that rewrote its own rules mid-fight. Options? She asked, voice steady despite the knot in her chest. Jax paused, then, we could overload the cargo bay emitters, turn the whole stern into a flare. Risky, but it might scatter them long enough for a blind jump. Lena chimed in, do it. We've got nothing to lose but the ship, and everything to gain for these people. Ilara exhaled, committing to the maneuver. The endeavor was more than hull and engines. It was their grit made manifest, pushing back against the void one desperate gambit at a time. As the overload built, the ship trembled, lights dimming to emergency reds. The swarm closed in, inexorable, but, in that charged silence, Ilara felt the weight of human history, not conquest but persistence. They'd face the net, burn through it if they had to, leaving scars on the stars that even machines couldn't erase. Elena gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles whitening as the ship's alarms blared in staccato bursts. The void outside the viewport twisted like molten glass, the anomaly they dubbed the Veil pulling at the hull with invisible fingers. Marcus wiped sweat from his brow, his usual smirk replaced by a grim line, tools clattering in his harness as he patched another failing relay. This jury rig is holding cap, but it's like plugging a sieve with spit. One more surge and we're ghosts. Lila's voice cut through the din from the auxiliary station, steady but edged with the caution that had saved them twice already. Scans show the Veil's density spiking. It's not just energy, it's rewriting local physics. If we push the engines now, we risk a cascade failure in the core. Her fingers danced over holographic displays, plotting trajectories that curved away from the heart of the storm. But every path looped back, the anomaly a hungry maw closing in. The fourth member of their crew, Doc Reyes, knelt by the injured ensign in the medbay alcove, his hand steady as he sealed a gash from the earlier breach. He's stable, but we can't afford more casualties. Elena, whatever we do, make it count, we're down to emergency reserves. His eyes met hers, the weight of command shared in that glance, a silent reminder of the two they'd already lost to the Veil's first lash. Elena nodded, her mind racing through the fragments of their plan. The initial thrust had worked, slingshotting them past the outer edge, but the backfire came swift. The anomaly's feedback had fried half their navigational array, stranding them in a pocket of warped space. Now, with oxygen recyclers straining and the hull groaning under pressure, adaptation was their only card. Marcus, reroute power from life support to the forward thrusters. Lila, give me a window, any window. We're not dying in this thing's belly. He grumbled but complied, his clever hands weaving cables like a surgeon. You're turning me into a magician, you know that? Next you'll want me to pull a rabbit out of the black hole. A spark jumped, and he cursed, but the lights flickered back to life, thrusters humming faintly. Lila's display pulsed green for a heartbeat. There, 40 seconds, bearing 247 Mark 12. It's tight, but if we feather the engines. Her voice trailed as the ship lurched, the Veil's pull intensifying, stars smearing into accusatory streaks. Elena strapped in, the chair's harness biting into her shoulders. All hands brace. On my mark. The crew's faces reflected in the console. Marcus's determined grit, Lila's focused calm, Reyes's quiet resolve. No speeches, just the raw push of survival. She punched the controls. Now. The ship surged, a wounded beast roaring against the tide. Metal screamed as they grazed the anomaly's fringe, systems overloading in a cascade of red warnings. Marcus shouted over the noise, shields at 20%, hold her steady. Elena's arms burned from the fight against the joysticks, every fiber urging them forward. Then, a shudder rippled through the deck, the core whining in protest. Lila's warning came too late. Feedback loop, it's pulling us back. The viewport filled with the swirling chaos, the veil claiming its due. Elena's heart hammered, the cost sharpening into focus. Not just the ship, but the fragile hope they'd carried from Earth, the proof that humanity could stare down the unknown. In that suspended moment, Marcus's voice broke through, sharp and inspired. Cap, vent the auxiliary tanks, use the exhaust as a counter-thrust. It was madness, a desperate flip of their failing plan, but Elena saw the spark of ingenuity that had gotten them this far. She slammed the override, the ship belching plasma into the void. The recoil hit like a whip, flinging them clear. Alarms quieted to whimpers, the stars snapping back into place. But as the adrenaline ebbed, Elena glanced at the readouts. Fuel critically low, hull integrity compromised, and a faint echo on sensors suggesting the veil wasn't done with them yet. They'd escaped the immediate grasp, but the galaxy felt smaller now, the stars a little less forgiving. The dim glow of the emergency lights cast long shadows across the bridge, turning the crew's faces into masks of exhaustion and resolve. Captain Elena Reyes gripped the armrest of her chair, her knuckles white against the worn leather. She'd always been the steady one, the anchor in storms both literal and figurative, but even she felt the pull of doubt now, like gravity from a black hole they couldn't see. Beside her, Engineer Tomas Hale hunched over the console, his fingers dancing across the flickering holograph, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill in the air. Tomas was the tinkerer, the man who saw puzzles where others saw walls, but tonight his usual spark dimmed under the weight of repeated failures. Another surge, he muttered, voice rough from hours of shouting over alarms. The ship, the old Odyssey, groaned as if in agreement, a deep metallic shudder rippling through the deck. Outside the viewport, the nebula swirled in toxic greens and purples, its tendrils probing the hull like living fingers. What they'd thought was a navigable cloud, a shortcut to the nearest relay station, had turned into a graveyard for lesser vessels. Electromagnetic storms fried their shields, and worse, the interference scrambled the quantum drive, leaving them drifting toward the core where radiation levels spiked to lethal. Lieutenant Kira Voss paced behind them, her boots thudding softly on the grated floor. Kira was fire incarnate, quick to act and quicker to question, her sharp eyes missing nothing. We can't keep patching like this. The core's destabilizing. If we don't vent the excess plasma soon, it'll breach. She shot a glance at the third member of their skeleton crew, Dr. Liam Chin, who sat cross-legged amid a nest of jury-rigged cables, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos. Liam, the xenobiologist turned reluctant savant, adjusted a makeshift probe with steady hands. He'd joined late, pulled from cryo after the first anomaly, his expertise on alien atmospheres now their only edge. Elena nodded, forcing her voice even. Options, people. The backup thrusters are offline, and the nebula's pulling us in faster. She didn't mention the unspoken toll. Oxygen recyclers at 40%, food stores for another week if they ration tight. The crew of 20 had dwindled to 4 after the initial breach, faces she still saw in her dreams, gone to explosive decompression or the void's cold embrace. Tomas straightened, rubbing his eyes. I rerouted power from life support to the emitters. It bought us time, but the next hit. He trailed off as a warning klaxon blared, red lights pulsing. The ship bucked violently, tossing Kira against the bulkhead. She caught herself with a grunt, blood trickling from a split lip, but waved off Liam's concern. I'm fine. What's the read? Liam tapped his tablet, the screen's glow illuminating the faint scars on his hands from lab accidents long past. The storm's evolving, patterns like neural firings. It's not random, it's adapting to us. His words hung heavy, a revelation pieced from fragments of data no AI could parse. In the vast silence of space, humanity's grit had always been their weapon, turning scraps into salvation. But this nebula felt alive, resentful of their intrusion. Elena stood, the decision crystallizing in the heat of the moment. Tomas, isolate the drive core. Kira, suit up, we're going EVA to manually purge the vents. Liam, you're with me on overrides. If the emitters overload, we use the auxiliary pod as a decoy. It was risky, exposing them to the nebula's fury, but waiting meant surrender. No speeches, no grand declarations, just the quiet pact of survivors who'd stared down worse. As they moved, the ship listed again, the stars beyond the viewport blurring into streaks of indifferent light. Tomas hesitated, then nodded, his wit surfacing in a wry half-smile. "Just don't make me explain this to the logs." Captain improvised with a coffee mug. "Doesn't sound heroic." Laughter, brittle but real, cut the tension for a breath. They donned helmets and gear, the airlocks hissing open to the abyss, where the nebula waited like a predator scenting blood. Out in the void, tethered to the hull, Elena felt the first lash of ionized particles against her suit, sparks dancing like fireflies on steroids. Kira worked beside her, wrench in hand, prying at the clogged vent while the storm howled in their comms. "It's fighting back," Kira growled, muscles straining as the panel resisted, warped by heat. Below them, the Odyssey's belly glowed faintly, a wounded beast adrift. Liam's voice crackled from inside. "Radiation spiking. You've got minutes before suit integrity fails." Elena ignored the burn in her limbs, twisting the valve with all her strength. It gave way with a pop, plasma venting in a brilliant arc that lit the darkness. But the nebula responded, a coil of energy slamming into the hull, shearing Kira's tether. She spun free, jetpack firing in panic, her scream lost in static. Elena's heart seized. "Kira." Tomas boosted the retrieval beam. Time stretched, the void indifferent, as she watched her friend tumble toward the swirling maw. In that endless second, the stars seemed to shift, making way for the inevitable. But Tomas, ever the improviser, overrode safeties, the beam latching on with a whine that echoed through the ship. Kira hauled back, gasping, the team whole again for now. Back inside, seals engaging with a finality that echoed their narrowing options. Elena stripped off her helmet, breath ragged. The purge had stabilized them, buying hours, but the nebula closed in, its core pulsing brighter. Liam met her eyes, a flicker of the bridge hummed with a low, steady vibration, the kind that seeped into bones after hours of tension. Captain Alara Voss gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles pale against the worn synth leather. The view screen dominated the forward wall, framing the fractured remnants of the asteroid field, jagged silhouettes against the nebula's glow, like teeth in a cosmic maw. Her crew, what was left of them, stood or sat in a loose semicircle. Engineer Kai wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days. Navigator Lyra, her fingers still dancing over holographic controls as if afraid to stop. And Doc Harlan leaning against a console, his medkit slung over one shoulder like an old friend. They'd made it. The rig's core was stable, the improvised shield holding against the radiation burst that had nearly cooked them alive. But the cost lingered in the air, thicker than the recycled oxygen. 3 habitats lost in the chain reaction, dozens of lives snuffed out before Kai's jury-rigged bypass could kick in. Ilara felt it in her chest, a weight that no triumph could lift entirely. "Status on the Exodus vector?" she asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. Lyra glanced up, her eyes shadowed but sharp. "Clear all the way to the relay point. The Alliance fleet's pulling back. Scans show they're rerouting to their core worlds. Whatever we did to that relay node, it bought us time." Kai snorted, tossing the rag onto a panel. "Time? We turned their fancy quantum snare into a fireworks show. Human ingenuity, right? Who needs their tech when you've got duct tape and spite?" Harlan chuckled dryly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Spite and a few broken ribs. Don't forget the medbays down to emergency stims. We pushed too hard on the return, and we'll be limping home in body bags." Ilara nodded, letting the words settle. She'd led them through the storm. First the resource pinch that forced the mining op into hostile space, then the Alliance interceptors turning the field into a kill zone. Their early plan, a straight evasion run, had backfired spectacularly when the rig's engines seized under fire. But Kai's adaptation, welding auxiliary thrusters from salvage to create a slingshot maneuver, had flipped the script. They'd not just escaped. They'd crippled the pursuer's command net, giving the colony fleet a window to slip away. Now the stars stretched out ahead, unyielding but no longer closing in. She rose, moving to the view screen, her boots thudding softly on the deck. The nebula swirled in hues of violet and gold, a beauty that mocked the scars they'd earned. "Patch me through to the convoy leads," she said. "Tell them we're green. Full burn in 5. As Lyra complied, the comms crackled to life with overlapping voices. Relief, exhaustion, the faint edge of hope. Ilara watched the readouts flicker. Life signs steadying, cargo holds intact with the rare isotopes that would rebuild what the Alliance had tried to steal. It wasn't victory without strings. The rig would need months in dry dock, and whispers of retaliation would echo for years. But humanity had walked away, slowly, battered but whole. Kai sidled up beside her, clapping a hand on her shoulder. "You think they'll come again?" She met his gaze, the weight in her chest shifting just enough to breathe. "Let them. We've got the stars on notice now." The engines thrummed deeper, propelling them forward. The field receded, the nebula parting like a curtain drawn aside. In the quiet that followed, Ilara allowed herself a small smile. They'd earned this drift into the void,